I call the September 27th, 2021 school board meeting to order. It is 7 p.m. We are in conference room C of the Fisher Administration Building at 12121 West North Avenue. Ms. Newman, please call the roll.
Ms. Fraley,
She's absent.
Dr. Jessup Banger,
Here.
Mr. Meyer,
Here.
Ms. Neufeld,
Absent.
Mr. Phillips,
Here.
Mr. Rowland,
Here.
Mr. Doman.
Here. Thank you. Our first order will be public comment on non-agenda items. Members of the Wauwatosa School Board value the input of students, parents, staff members, and community members. The board's regularly scheduled meetings provide an opportunity for opinions and concerns to be expressed publicly. The board values all comments and will respectfully consider this input in decision-making. The board requests that individuals limit their comment to each item to 3 minutes. Following any comment, an individual board member may respond on the issue raised. However, it is not the intent of the public comment portion of the agenda for the board to enter into a debate with members of the community. Because non-agenda items are not publicly posted in advance, no action will be taken on public comment regarding non-agenda items this evening. Are there any members of the public in the room that would like to speak on non-agenda items? Please come forward, state your name and address, and you have 3 minutes.
Joe McClue from 772 North 116th Street. Dr. Means, member of the board, thank you for letting me speak. What I'd like to comment on is the item that was discussed at the in-service on limiting public comment. Well, people probably are not aware of the fact that this board held a quietly noticed meeting listed as an in-service / retreat held on the 17th and 18th of this month. Why was that meeting, which was that the board was well aware of several weeks in advance, noticed only the last minute is a question that I do have. Seems like it's an attempt in order to limit people that are aware of the meeting and attending it. Furthermore, that meeting, most in-service meetings are recorded and or broadcast. However, that meeting, for some reason, was decided, and again, well in advance, I was made aware of the meeting on September 2nd. Again, this means September 17th and 18th, was not, for some reason, decided to be recorded and or broadcast. Again, it seems like an attempt to limit people's awareness of what's going on. During that meeting, the last half hour of that meeting was an open discussion by this board on limiting public comment. This seems ridiculous to me. We should be looking for increases in public comment, not decreases. Apparently, some members of this board feel it's too inconvenient or disruptive to their own deliberations to have public comment taken on an agenda item. As such, a couple different proposals were put forth by this body in limiting public comment. First one would be to push the public comment to the beginning and or end of the meeting and limiting the number of people that can comment. As such, doing it before or beginning of the meeting does not allow the members of the public to listen to deliberations on a particular item and then comment afterwards or your deliberations. Pushing it to the end of the meeting basically primarily puts it after a vote, since a lot of items are voted on during the night discussion. So that would be basically a mute point to the comment after a voting fact. Other items of consideration is changing the meeting menu, so that only one meeting during the month would actually allow public comments, and the second meeting would be an in-service meeting where no public comments would be taken. And it's even was suggested that no recording of that meeting would take place. This again seems ridiculous. We're changing format when we should be asking people for input on things and not limiting it. Let me be quite clear. For those members that do not want to hear public comment during meetings, you will still be heard from us. This body is an elected body. As such, elections upcoming, we'll be looking at replacing individuals who may even decide to vote in favor of limiting public comment. This is a matter where we should be looking for additional public comment and not restricting it. So all these suggestions are preposterous. The one idea that I did like was the idea for major issues taking more of a public hearing approach to things. But then someone actually commented, well, then we don't even have to attend. We can just record those sessions and listen to them later. Apparently, we're supposed to come up to a microphone, make our public statements, and then just hope that somewhere down the line, members of this body will actually listen
You
to
are
it.
well past 3 minutes now. If you could wrap it up.
Thank you.
Please. Any other public comment from people in the room on non-agenda items? Jamie, is there anyone online?
There are no hands raised.
All right, we will move on to the consent agenda for this evening. Are there any items that on the consent agenda which board members would like to remove for separate discussion and action? Seeing none, may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Thank you. Is there any board discussion on the consent agenda? We'll move to community comment on the consent agenda. Anyone in the room that would like to speak on any items on the consent agenda? Jamie, is there anyone online?
There are no hands raised.
Mr. President, in accordance with the updates that we've been providing for the past few months regarding vacancies, I just want to provide the board and the community updates on where our vacancies are currently. We have a 1.0 vacancy in special education at West High School, a 1.0 special education vacancy at within our Wauwatosa Virtual Academy. We have a 0.5 vacancy with our instructional equity coach at Val R. Phillips, and a 0.5 vacancy as an innovation specialist at Val Phillips as well. Those are our vacancies right now.
Thank you for that update. Any other board discussion? Ms. Newman, please call the roll.
Dr. Jessup Banger,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Ms. Mufeld? Yes. Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Rowland?
Yes.
Mr. Dillman?
Yes. We'll move on to buildings and grounds action items, approval of a truck purchase. Mr. Phillips?
Sure. It is recommended that the school board approve the purchase of a new dump truck with snow removal equipment for the bid amount of $70,577 from Ewald Hartford Ford to replace one of the existing dump trucks in the district's operations maintenance fleet. And I so move.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Go ahead.
How are you?
Good.
I know I've gotten a chance to know a few of you over the years. I wanted to hopefully just take an opportunity.
Your name, sir?
I'm sorry, what?
Your
name.
Just introduce yourself.
Yeah, Greg Chewinski, Buildings and Grounds.
Thank you.
Okay. Yep, we're good to
Yeah,
go.
Go ahead.
Yes, we are.
Yeah, I just I wanted to give an opportunity to say who I am. I'm Greg Chewinski, Buildings and Grounds. I am now the Director of Buildings and Grounds. I've haven't had a chance to meet all of you, but I think most of you know of me and who I am. But I've been in the district for 13 years, and my current role here is to oversee all the operations, the maintenance, and the cleaning of all 14 of our buildings, as well as our beautiful athletic facilities here and our grounds and playgrounds and play structures. My ultimate role, I think, has been to provide a clean, safe, comfortable, and productive learning environment for our kids and our teaching staff, and as well as our community. And I just wanted to at least kind of officially introduce myself, since this is the first time that I'm kind of in the hot seat here. So I hope that that's okay that I did that.
Please.
Absolutely. Anytime. Thank you.
Could you just briefly speak to the item before us, just the rationale before it and why it's necessary? Thank you.
Yeah, so we have we've got a range of vehicles in our maintenance and operations fleet, all part of how we maintain everything. Throughout the years, we've tried to update those or buy new when they get a little bit on the older side and we start sinking piles of money in them. The truck here that we would be looking to purchase would be a replacement of our oldest. Essentially, it's our plow truck, one of our plow trucks, which we have 5 of. This is much like another truck that we have that's a year younger, but it's a 2004, I believe, and essentially looking to replace it. It's time. It's 17 years old. So we're looking for approval from the board to approve this purchase as a replacement, not an additional vehicle.
Rick, could you just speak to the process of how we retire a vehicle and what happens with that vehicle that we retire and how we still have the possibility of gaining some revenue as a result of the retirement?
Sure. So, I mean, you can see there's in the executive summary that you guys were provided that there are a couple of vehicles that are actually a little bit older. However, those are more maintenance van type vehicles. They don't get quite as much wear and tear. So it's kind of looking at, how much have we been spending throughout the years on certain vehicles? How old are they? What their purposes are and all of that kind of stuff. And that's a factor in which ones we choose to replace and when we replace them. In the past, we have done things like doing trade-ins and stuff for the vehicles and doing it as a trade-in value. We have had some success in the last year or so with some of our equipment, and we work with the purchasing department and the school district to put on like an auction, if you will, and sell the equipment and the vehicles. And we've had really good success with this and typically get more than we would get for a trade-in value. So that's kind of what we're doing at this point with this. There's no trade-in value for this one, but it would be our intent to sell the vehicle. And that would essentially recoup some of that, the monies for the new purchase.
I just want to make a comment. Looking at the overall fleet and the age of the fleet and all that, I just got to commend you guys on just the use, the long-term use of those vehicles. And, it's rare to see that vintage of vehicle and that many of them, in a fleet and continue to be used. So that just really kudos to your department and to the maintenance, the commitment to maintenance and keeping these as a resource for the district as long as possible. Yeah. Thank you.
Is this an item that was already in the budget and we are just approving it now, or is this an additional item to the budget? Do we know that?
It's an item that when I proposed the operating budget that I included it in there.
What? Okay.
Correct.
And this is outside of it. And if you don't know this answer, that's okay. I'm interested with the snow removal. Have we ever looked at not doing that ourselves, but contracting out for that?
We have looked at it.
I'm sure there's pros and cons to that, but
there are pros and cons to it. We have looked at it before. It's been a couple of years since we did. It does seem to be a bit more expensive that way. The problems so we did have, just to give the history of that, we did have contracted services for our city sidewalks at one point in time. The problem with contracted services is that they're not necessarily at our beck and call for removing snow. So it became difficult with getting them in before school started and all of that kind of stuff. And one of the rationales to keeping it in-house is that we have the ability with our operations crews, and they all know that on a week that it might, snow over the weekend, they come in and they can flex their hours towards the end. So we're not using overtime and all of that kind of stuff. So we have a better way of managing the hours in that way and saving us costs that way.
Yeah.
So we did move away from all the city sidewalks. I think it was 2 years ago where we still had half of them contracted, but purchased equipment that would allow our staff to be able to clear those.
thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Any other thoughts or comments from the board? Ms. Newman, you can call the roll. Oh, I'm sorry. Community comment on the buildings and ground item. Anybody in the room that would like to speak? Jamie, anyone online?
No hands raised.
Thank you. Ms. Newman, you can now call the roll.
Dr. Jessup Banger,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Ms. Mufeld, yes, Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Allen,
Yes.
Mr. Doman.
Yes. Thank you. Appreciate your time. Approval of cleaning contract with addendum. Mr. Rollins?
It is recommended that the school board approve the 2021-2022 school year contract with Dan Plows Cleaning Inc. with an addendum, and I so move.
I second.
All right. Go ahead.
So we are currently looking to not only approve a contract for the 21-22 school year, but also adding an addendum to it. consistent with what we did at Lincoln and Underwood for the last one that was approved for a 1-year extension. Lincoln and Underwood being much larger in square footage, assessing the cleaning needs of, more window glass, more door glass, more carpeting, all of that kind of stuff. It had been decided to include 2 extra cleaners essentially at night. So 2 40-hour positions. I'm sorry, 1 at each of those schools. The second year of the contract was never officially approved by the school board, but there was an amount of a contract that was signed for 2 years. And the addendum that we are looking for in this case would be to add that additional 40 hours of cleaning at Wilson Elementary, Wilson STEM, and at McKinley Elementary School.
Any, Mr. Meyer?
I have what I think is a pretty serious comment. All my comments are serious, but this is starting to look like a grave problem here. This is the 3rd publicly disclosed situation where a school district department has purchased something with board approval where our own purchasing policies weren't followed, or the contract signed wasn't what the board approved, or the contract was signed before the board approved. And I support this tonight to clean this up. And I have to say that the school board owes it to the community to out loud in open meeting admit, and I'm speaking only for myself here, not for the other board members, that in senior management in the school district, we have a compliance problem with respect to policies and rules. Dr. Means inherited this problem. He is trying to clean it up. I have every confidence in Dr. Means. Failure to comply is not respectful of the trust the taxpayers put into us with use of taxpayer dollars, and it is clearly not in the best interest of providing the best services for the children. I believe a solution for this and action towards a solution would be, as I requested, for the school board to have a working meeting with our external auditors to review the scope and depth of our outside audit activity, that we provide a higher level of verification of administrative actions in order to address the compliance culture. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Any other board comments or questions?
Thank you. How will we follow up on that? I strongly agree that we do need to have an internal audit process. It doesn't, obviously these are alarming missteps here. However, it's just good practice to have an internal audit. And especially now considering the purchasing issues that have come to our attention. So how can we have a proposal by the board president and the superintendent on how to proceed?
I can definitely speak with President Doman. As the board knows, and maybe the community knows, but we're by statute, we have an external audit conducted every year. That audit has finally been concluded in the last week or so. The results of that audit will be presented to the board. I want to assume that you've had the results of the audit come before you annually after they're conducted. So we'll stay with that tradition and bring the auditors to a board meeting to share with you and the community the results of said audit. And so that's in our schedule of reports that are coming later this year.
Yes, I am aware of the audit, but often the external audit would not cover this process in depth. And that is why I'm requesting an additional internal audit. And again, this is just good practices for many companies. I think Mr. Phillips is shaking his head that I just think we should adopt that practice. And it's not a punitive practice. It's just we want to make sure that everything is working properly. We've had turnover in departments. I think it protects us. And if we have to change policy because maybe it doesn't suit our organization and how we purchase, that's an opportunity to look and consider that too. It's a common thing to do. And I'm asking the board president and the superintendent to consider an internal audit process.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Allow me to work with President Doman to come up with some possibilities, and then we'll bring it back to the full board.
So if I may add, I wish to agree with Mrs. Mufeld that I was taught in my MBA program from the audit professors that when planning an audit, the auditor has to consider the compliance culture of the organization. We have had a lot of confidence in our compliance culture. Now we're seeing that, it's not what everything we need it to be. So it would be fair to go to the auditors, either our external auditors or in some fashion an internal audit function, to say, we need to understand that we have had some compliance breakdowns, and therefore we need to adjust our audit activity to reflect that reality. And maybe later in the future, our compliance culture improves, then maybe we can not invest so much money and time in auditing. We always need to audit, of course, but we need to have the audit reflect what's actually happening in the organization. Thank you.
Sorry, I just wanted to add that, most often in an organization, it's a quality area. It's actually personnel in the district, in this case, that perhaps would be considered to do such an activity. Obviously we'd have to free up someone. It's a consideration. So however it sounds like we're in an agreement of a direction that we can proceed however you think is best.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other board comments or questions on this item? Any public comment on the approval of cleaning contract? Jamie, anyone online?
No hands raised.
Please call the roll.
Dr. Chesapanger,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Ms. Mufeld,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Dolman.
Yes. Moving on to special education action items, approval of out-of-district placement contracts. Dr. Joseph Banger.
It is recommended that the school board approve the out-of-district placement contract with My Path Company, and I so move.
Second.
Thank you.
No, out of this one. Set. All set. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Therese Kwiatkowski, and I'm the Director of Special Education for the Wauwatosa School District. Just a brief comment about special education, a little bit of background information. For students with disabilities, every student has what's known as an individualized educational plan, also known as an IEP, that summarizes the special education services the student receives and also the place where those services are delivered. IEPs, as they're referred to, are created by a group of stakeholders, including school staff, families, and other individuals and providers. Little background knowledge, our district uses a variety of alternative school options in our area. You may recall earlier this year that the school board approved our contract with CESA number 1 and the Elmbrook School District for alternative learning options. Tonight, we're asking the Board of Education to approve our contract with MyPath Company. MyPath operates the Richardson School and Genesee Lake School, 2 other options in our community. These schools are designed to meet the unique needs of students with developmental disabilities such as autism or a student with an intellectual disability. Students enrolled in the Richardson School and Genesee Lake School, as well as other alternative schools, continue to have an IEP. A student's IEP articulates the academic, behavioral, and social goals for those students, as well as possible other needs a student may have. While students enrolled in these programs often do not have access to typical peers during the regular school day, they do receive the highly specialized instruction they need. Additionally, district staff and families have the opportunity to collaborate with other professionals who specialize in these areas. By approving this contract, the district can continue to use these resources to meet the needs of our students with disabilities. Districts and families have regular contact with MyPath schools throughout the time a student is enrolled. This includes a daily report of the activities a student was involved in and their engagement in those activities, regular check-in meetings, as well as annual IEPs and progress reports. As far as the budget, this is a summary of the daily rate for each program. And then I've also included the cost of 15 minutes of a related service for a student who may need that. We can choose to use the related service provider through their organization or send her own if we so choose. In most cases, we send our own speech therapist and occupational therapist to meet the needs of these students. The recommendation to the superintendent is to recommend approval of our out-of-district placement contract to the Board of Education. And finally, the recommendation to the school board is approval of the out-of-district placement contract with MyPath Company. Thank you.
Thank you. Any board questions or comments?
So my question is, this sounds like a new provider that we have not used in the past. Is that correct?
No, we've been working with the Richardson School and Genesee Lake School in the past.
Okay, and so they are part of MyPath.
Yes.
Understood. Okay.
Yes.
That answers my other question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, my question built on that a little bit. Are there other providers that do this? I mean, is this something that is in accordance with our policy as far as looking for 3 bids? Does that fall under that? Help me just understand that a little bit.
I would consider the MyPath company as a sole source operator, that they provide a special service, especially in our metropolitan area, that you can't find in any other location.
Any other board questions or comments? Any community comment on this item? Jamie, anyone online?
No hands raised.
Thank you. Ms. Newman, please call the roll.
Dr. Jessup Banger,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Ms. Neufeld,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Dillman.
Yes, thank you. The next item is approval of a wheelchair accessible van purchase. Mr. Meyer?
It is recommended that the school board approve the purchase of a wheelchair accessible van, and I so move.
Second.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll keep going. So last spring, the district applied for a transition readiness grant through the Department of Public Instruction. In July, we received notification that we were awarded a $25,000 grant toward the purchase of a wheelchair accessible van. $25,000 was the maximum allowable expenditure for transportation costs. Currently, we own 2 vans that are primarily used for 18 to 21-year-old transition services. Our district relies on First Student Bus Company to transport students who do require the use of a wheelchair. If purchased, the van will primarily be used for 18 to 21-year-old transition services. However, it can also be used to transport other students with disabilities. While there are some costs and liabilities associated with transporting students and owning a van, owning a wheelchair accessible van will provide us with flexibility and better access to community-based learning opportunities. Earlier this year, our Business Services Department issued a request for proposal to purchase a wheelchair accessible van. EWA Automotive is ready to fulfill this request if approved by the board. While the young adults currently participating in our transition services do not require the use of a wheelchair accessible van, our middle school and high school enrollment reflects a need in the future. As part of the grant application, we agreed to cover the costs associated with the purchase of the van beyond the $25,000 maximum allowable funds. We'll use our federal IDEA funds for the additional costs. The recommendation to the superintendent is to recommend approval of the purchase of a wheelchair accessible van to the Board of Education. And finally, the recommendation to the school board is to approve the purchase of a wheelchair accessible van. Thank you.
Thank you. Any board comments or questions? Mr. Meyer.
Yes, thank you. Has the RFP material, the items in the RFP, the requirements, the individual requirements, have they been reviewed by the parent community of students with disabilities?
Not that I'm aware of. Our business office took care of the RFP, so I'm not aware of how that was handled, but I can look into that.
I know we're having, I'm hearing what you're saying, that we're kind of, other people are handling this now, I'm gathering in some respect. So how can you give us assurance that you will not just look into it, but will actually solicit input from the parent community as to specifics about the van? I'm sure they have some very helpful input, or even just to verify that this is exactly what they think will be useful. I have input from a parent who had questions, for example, of, well, what is the placement and the direction that the chairs are facing in the van and things like that. There were very specific interests about how the interior of the van would be configured. And I don't know anything about it myself. So the question is, have people been consulted who are going to be the users of this van?
No, I think procedurally, typically when an RFP goes out, which is drafted by our procurement office, it talks about specifications that are necessary to meet the needs of that student population. If the board approves the purchase this evening and there is a parent or multiple families that have questions about the van that you approve, then I'm sure that the special education department will address those questions and ensure that all questions are answered.
You're putting me in a hard spot because an RFP would have specifications for the van, and you're asking me to approve something where the specifications haven't been published. That puts me in a bad situation here. I don't want to vote against this because then it looks like I'm voting against an accessible van, yet we haven't done, to my mind, our due diligence that I would have done when I was writing RFPs in my employment before I retired. It was typical that I would solicit input from the user community as part of authoring the RFP. And you're telling me you haven't done that.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. I guess to build on that comment, Is there a time sensitive need for us to approve, or like how much of a box would that put the district in if it was just tabled for a meeting for some time to gather information about the definition of, like, I have questions just about like what is adaptive equipment? Like, what does that mean? And what makes it a wheelchair accessible van? Yeah. So I guess that would be my question. Number one would be, if we waited for the next meeting, how difficult would that be for people?
So I don't have specific information about that. In my conversation with the business office, the company is waiting because of manufacturing like timelines, and obviously there's, my understanding is that they need to know like ASAP because of the manufacturing cycle, but I don't have the details of that. That's so potentially could put a delay on actually on when we're able to get the van.
Are there companies that have vans already?
No. Not under my understanding is they're not, that they have to be created based on requests, that there aren't none, that there are not any readily available right now.
Could you speak to them, like the things that make this a wheelchair accessible van? Like what is different about it?
Sure, there's space. Well, there's a ramp to get a wheelchair into the van, a door that would be a wheelchair would be able to fit into, and a way to secure the wheelchair. And this van will have room for one wheelchair plus additional student seating.
Is this a converted minivan type van? Are we talking a large 10 to 12 passenger?
Sorry, it's more of a minivan. It's not a 10 to 12 passenger because there's room, there's like a bench for students and then space for the wheelchair. So I think that the additional seating is 4 additional seats, 2 in the front, the driver, passenger, and then 2 additional in the seat, is my understanding.
So there are companies that do this outside of car dealerships that only do this work. Actually recently involved in the purchase of one of these, so for better or worse. And I know some of them do have them on site. So I don't know if this is the only route that we would have to go. They have ones that are already converted and you can go to a showroom and see them. I'm not saying it's 100, but 5, 6, 7, something like that. So I think there is an option for us to go that route. And I would imagine even one of them might even be able to come and answer specific questions if that's something to look for. And I do have some names if you want them. So are we thinking this is something we would like tabled potentially?
I guess I'd be interested in hearing if there's any community comment first before.
Me as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, before we make a decision on that, why don't we, any other board question or comment before we go to community comment? Ms. Michelle.
Thank you. I mean, I do know that there are different configurations of vehicles, especially if you're ordering them. And I do know that the timeline to get vehicles is long, if you can get them. So it sounds like we need a better vehicle sooner than maybe we could even have one manufactured to meet some needs. So I'm interested in that, interim step, depending on the timeline as well. If we could find out what's the lead time, because almost everything is being delayed now. And we might still need something in the interim that we have to approve for a rental, or I'm not sure. So I'd like to find out more information before voting on this.
Any other board questions or comments before we go to public comment?
Yes.
Go ahead, Mr. Meyer.
Ms. Queen, we understand you're in a tough spot because this was handed to you and it was started by someone else. So right. So you weren't there from the beginning of this. So no, we realize that.
Thank you. As far as the purchasing of the van, that's
right.
Yeah. I can tell you about the grant that I applied for. I was really excited when I got the letter saying we got it.
Absolutely. We understand that. Thank you, Mr. Meyer. It was an important point. Why don't we go to public comment in the room?
I'm afraid to touch this because last time I dropped it. Hi, Deb Falk-Pellick, 7435 West Wall Street. Honestly, this is another prime example that if this school district had a committee on disability, you could leverage the expertise of members of our community on this. I work very closely with the director of Milwaukee County's Transit Plus, which they transport people with disabilities throughout the entire county. Recently had some conversations because the city of Wauwatosa is looking at purchasing a vehicle. So comments, I would love to see this RFP, what was put in it, in the specifications, and hopefully this type of thing can be shared. I have concerns about a ramp versus a lift for injury purposes, not only potential problems with students, but staff too, with using that. I have questions about, will the entrance be side loading, back loading? I personally would like to see 2 securement systems in there, how they're secured, which, like you said, Mr. Meyer, which direction students are facing. So I think I have a lot of questions on this too. Do I think that we need this? I would love to have this. It helps really to bring more opportunities to our students with disabilities. And I would really, really encourage the use of our members in the community. And honestly, I continue to keep track of all issues in this district, that if we had, like some other districts do, a committee on disability, we could be talking with the parents, the students, with drawing in even the city's committee to be dealing and helping on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Julie Alexander, at 7224 West State Street. I'm also the co-chair of the Wauwatosa Community for Assistance with Disabilities. I have some concerns about this item. First off, I'm thinking Ewald, I'm not quite sure. I work at Independence First. I know a lot about accessibility and car modifications here. I'm not sure if we're dealing with a dealership that, I'm hoping that they would know how to make van adaptable, but you're dealing with a private car manufacturer, and I'm not quite sure about that. And there are other companies that do that. Do they have a contract with somebody else to do those types of things? That would be my question. On the other hand, another thing I'm thinking, one wheelchair spot. If we have a number of students, basically, if we have 5 students, that means 5 separate trips in order to get people with disabilities to a location, and that seems to be a lot of weight for students to do that. So I'd really be interested in something that had more than one spot in a van. And there are vans that are made with more than that. There's the vans that you can look online that you can get, and there are vans that you can rent that are accessible too. And there are also options for you to rent a total van for a day in order to get to a field trip that's accessible. So there are a lot of options that are out there, and I'm wondering if any of those were really explored and just sort of costed out in terms of all of this, because that's one of my other questions here. I'm hoping that the board can think about this carefully before they approve something that we haven't even seen the RFP from, to see what we're getting. That's what really concerns me, because I don't want us to get something that's not going to fit our needs and the needs of people with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for the assistance with the microphone. Thank you. Any other public comment from in the room? Tammy, is there anyone online?
Yeah, we have one hand raised.
Go ahead.
Sky, you have the microphone. Please state your name and address.
My name is Raymond Cronick, 4134 North 93rd Street. I agree with the last person. I think we should look and ask, is one enough? That is, and should we be using more of a specialty dealer, not just a car dealer? Maybe a more van dealer? Because my parents are going to buy a van right now, and they're using a wheelchair accessible van dealership, not just Ewald Automotive. They're more specialized, and they also can fix their stuff on site. That's something what Ewald probably doesn't have access to. Them are my questions right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else online, Jamie?
No, that's it.
Coming back to the board, any follow-up comments or questions, Mr. Phillips?
Sure. Looks like in the executive summary, we're currently renting. Can we continue to use that vendor for students if this gets delayed?
So we've been using First Student
Yeah.
Bus Company
Yeah.
for our transportation. And
Right.
I'm sure you've heard of the challenges right now with
Yes.
buses. That's also true for wheelchair accessible
Got
buses.
it.
But yeah, we still have our contract with First Student that we can use to transport students that require
If
that.
they have drivers, yeah.
If they have drivers and if there's a van available. It's been
Right,
quite the
right.
puzzle this year.
Well, thanks for that. And I wanted to also thank you for applying for that grant and congratulations on getting that awarded for the district.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So my comment would be, it sounds like echo Mr. Phillips' comments about the grant, and I'm really glad that we're moving forward with this. I think conceptually, I'm really supportive of it. It sounds like there may be a moment to pause here to engage community in some conversation around this and see if there's any possible opportunities for collaboration, and table this for a moment and bring it back in 2 weeks if it's ready to go. So I would move to table this item.
Is there a second?
Second.
You have comment on tabling the item? I don't know if we would have a date, but I would say a point in the future where we have kind of some of these questions answered, I think would be appropriate. And I would really encourage us to contact one of those companies that do this type of work specifically. Like I said, unfortunately, I've gone through this recently and and I know our public, I'm sure, has some names of folks that will work. So let's do that.
I mean, if I may,
Mr. Mayor.
I do not look at this as a delay. I look at this as a final step that, at least in my old profession in IT, building computer systems, it was littered with stories of well-intentioned people who built something and didn't ask the users what they thought. And then it came to pass. It wasn't really what was the right thing. And so I think this is a step we need to take. And Ms. Kwiatkowski, I appreciate you picking up the baton on this. And I know you didn't start it. And now you'll have the chance to take this last step to find the user requirements. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Smith, why don't you call the roll on tabling this item?
Dr. Jessup Banger,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Ms. Mufeld,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Dillman.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate you coming forward. We will move on to presentation of annual seclusion and restraint report.
Tim, let me put my presentation back up.
I'll keep going. Still the same one that I had up before. That's it. Thank you. Yep. Thank you. So Wisconsin law, Wisconsin Act 118, provides legislation on the use of seclusion and physical restraint in schools. A component of this legislation is the requirement to provide an annual report to the school board on the use of seclusion and restraint in schools. This slide has the actual definitions straight from the legislation, as well as some key points of the law. So this legislation actually originated in 2012 through Act 125, which was revised recently in 2019. The Department of Public Instruction provides school districts with support and technical assistance in the area of seclusion and restraint. And here I have linked in the Department of Public Instruction's. They have a complete website on seclusion and restraint. I hope I can get back to my actual report now. So the goals of the legislation is really to prevent the misuse of seclusion and restraint in schools, as well as to ensure the safety of staff and students. In Wisconsin, or in Wauwatosa, we use the resources through the Crisis Prevention Institute to train our staff in crisis prevention and intervention. This training model uses a proactive approach to teach staff how to detect and de-escalate a crisis. In Wauwatosa, we currently have 4 certified trainers. At the beginning of the school year, we share information on Act 118 with our building principals and other key staff members, including building crisis teams and our special education staff. Additionally, we review this information with building principals, as well as consult with principals as needed. Annually, we share our report to the Board of Education, as well as the Department of Public Instruction. This slide shows the summary of the actual incidents of seclusion and restraints, as well as it has the actual report linked in. And it should be noted that the actual report fulfills the requirements, the reporting requirements that's included in the legislation about reporting the number of incidents of seclusion, restraint, number of incidents of both seclusion and restraint, the number of students with disabilities involved, and then the total number of students involved. Act 118 requires a team to debrief following any incident of seclusion and or restraint. In addition, the nonviolent crisis intervention framework also includes a debrief as well, both a debrief to assess the students' emotional well-being as well as staff's. We fund our training through our coordinated early intervening services budget. Our anticipated costs for the 2021-22 school year are listed here. The recommendation to our superintendent is to recommend the approval of the seclusion and restraint report to the Board of Education. And the recommendation to the school board is acceptance of the seclusion and restraint report. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments, Ms. Raw?
Thank you for this report. I know we get it for every year. The one question I've got, I guess, for this year is how often or how common is it for someone who has not participated in the training to be performing seclusion or restraint? Is that a common thing, or is that?
It's pretty uncommon. We have about, right now, we have about 230-ish staff trained. A lot of our staff, the training really focuses on, again, proactive and de-escalation. So it's good training for any staff member who is engaging with students that may have problems with regulation or those kinds of things. So a lot of our staff utilize the training for that reason. So it's pretty rare that a staff member would be involved in an incident without the training. When there's a student in crisis, usually the building crisis team, there's a plan in place for those students, and the crisis team members are trained.
And if there's a substitute, short-term or long-term, that is joining a classroom that maybe has a student that is, has a recurring kind of thing, what do we do to just sort of educate or train that substitute for that, if anything? Just curious.
Mm-hmm. So for substitute teachers, depending on, especially for long-term substitute teachers, while we don't train them in this actual method, we usually make sure that there's obviously, if the student is a student with a disability, that they would have access to the student's IEP as well as their behavior intervention plan, as well as to make sure that there's staff in the building, usually nearby. I mean, typically with students that struggle with regulation and require this type of intervention, there's typically staff nearby that student for the majority of their day, kind of engaging and monitoring their needs at that time.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other board questions or comments? Could you speak a little bit to the high number of incidents at Washington and Wilson STEM? Those really kind of stick out? And is there a certain reason for those?
So in some cases, it's difficult to speak to the specifics in regard, because of confidentiality, but in some cases, we have incidents where students may require that intervention. And as a result, the student is referred for special education and then may be found eligible for special education so that a plan can be put in place for that student. So it's not unusual. There have been cases where students, prior to having that special education support in place, may require that type of physical intervention more than we'd like to see.
So when we see number of incidents, that doesn't necessarily mean it's number of students involved.
Correct. If you look at the actual report, it lists the number of students involved. And then, so it could be like, you can have a building that has a student that requires that intervention. Typically there are younger students, we're not going to be using seclusion and restraint with high school students typically. So it's really typically our younger students who have difficulty regulating themselves and often would require that. It is used as a last resort. A lot happens prior to that. If a student is not unsafe, we will let them have their moments. Sometimes in some cases, we'll clear out classrooms if need be before using that type of an intervention. But if the student is becoming harmful to those around them, that's when we would use that.
Thank you. Any other board questions or comments? Any public comments on this item from in the room?
There's no doubt that seclusion and restraint is exceedingly traumatizing for any child. And also the adults and the other children in the room. A couple of things that I just wanted to point out regarding the policy itself, which is 5630.01. Act 125 is now Act 118 regarding this, but our policy, the last paragraph still refers to Act 125. So there's a little bit of a disconnect in there, but in that same sentence, it says the district shall prepare administrative guidelines in accordance with Wisconsin Act 125. Is it possible for those administrative guidelines that the district has prepared regarding seclusion and restraint to be publicly available so that it's maybe linked somehow in the policy, if that would be possible? Also, there was an incredible amount with disability advocacy agencies across the state to get Act 118 passed, primarily led by Disability Rights Wisconsin. So I'm wondering, not only with our staff going through the techniques, the nonviolent crisis intervention techniques, but have our staff been educated on the changes that occurred from Act 125 to 118, so that those updates and changes, that staff are aware of those and trained on those.
Hi, Julie Alexander again here. I'm really amazed at the number of students, looking at them. It's not 74, but even the number is pretty high. And I'm just sort of concerned a little bit because, it is very traumatizing. And I'm wondering if it really is something that is totally necessary here. I'm wondering if there is a way of going back to the families of some of these students and sort of coming up with a better behavioral plan, or, just getting more of the families involved so that, they might know of something that is maybe simple that, they may not have talked about, and some of the things that maybe things have changed a little bit. So just really re-looking at some of this stuff, because it's just really unimaginable. It's sad to think that 21 students are not controlled because, their parents control them in some way, shape, or form. So I'm just sort of wondering if there might be a way of re-looking at it, maybe re-looking at some of the ways that the policy is, so that, that the students and the parents are all working together with the teacher and the school system, rather than students being traumatized all the time. That's just my comment here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other public comment in the room? Jamie, anyone online?
There are no hands raised.
Yes, thank you. I just want to clarify, would you be able to bring up the actual reporting that you prepared? I think there was confusion, especially by this last comment, that the number of students, alarming as it is alarming. And your point is well taken, but I want to make sure that we know what data we're looking at. Tim? Sure.
I just don't want to miss that. Can you pull my thing back up? That one. Here, I can find it in here. Sorry, Sharon, I'm trying to find it.
Just minimize this.
And click on that report. Yep, there you go, Sharon. Sorry about that.
Thank you. So if you scroll down and
Therese, you might want to share your screen.
oh yeah.
Tim, I want to share my screen, please. Yep. Scroll down here.
And would you just talk a little bit about how this data is pulled together? Because how I read this is there are one or two students in the building with so many incidents.
Correct.
And you were sharing with us earlier that they are a varied range of seclusion and restraint types, if I understand this right.
Correct.
So I'd like if you could just kind of frame this data for us.
Sure.
A little better.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So if you look at this data, there's incidents of seclusion as well as incidents of restraint, and then a combination of seclusion and restraint. And I'm going to also articulate for restraint. A restraint, if a student is restrained for 5 seconds, that's documented. So I want to let the board understand that most of our restraints are under a minute or around a minute. I don't have the specific numbers, but it's not where we're restraining students for extended period of times. Then we have the total number of students involved, and it's usually 1 to 2 students in a building that require this intervention. And like I shared earlier, in many cases, some of these students come to us and they're not identified as a student with a disability, but they require this type of intervention. So we do conduct a special education evaluation, and often these students then do receive special education services and supports, and a behavior intervention plan can be put in place. Does that answer your question?
It does. And I just want to, again, I don't know, we haven't really taken a deep dive into this data on, like, especially when you get a little bit further, there were 94 incidents for one student. I think, if that's the number.
So that would be
Or
two
two
students. And
students.
again, these are down here, the, what's new in Act 118 is that we're required to report incidents of seclusion and restraints for our students involved in alternative school programs. As I explained earlier, we talked about the Richardson School as one of those schools where students often struggle with regulation and those kinds of things.
Mhm.
And again, when those incidents happen, I do get the report on those incidents, as does the family.
Mhm. And when are they, and obviously they're traumatizing every time a child is in this situation. So I'm just curious on when do we flag it? The data tells one story, but
I can tell you that in incidents where it may be, where it may be something that's happened with a specific student more than once, I'm usually contacted. So in these situations last year, I was pretty involved in all of them that had more than 2 incidents.
well, and do we also consider an alternate placement, for example, if, they just are really having a hard time? I mean, it sounds like,
Sure.
some of the students, even if they're 1 or 2, they are having a hard time.
And that would be an IEP team decision. In some cases, that is considered if that type of support and intervention is needed. Sometimes IEPs have made that decision for specific students.
Okay, well, thank you. I just wanted to go back on that, especially since that comment, just so we are very clear the number of students here and how we process
Yeah.
through.
No, I appreciate that clarification.
Thank you.
Any other report, Mr. Allen?
Thank you. One of the things raised was if there was a way for the public to access administrative guidelines. I just want to see if you want to speak to that. Just a way to access policies and administrative guidelines. Basically, you can access policies and administrative guidelines through Board Docs online. So there's like a policy section, there's an administrative guidelines section. I feel like there's a third section that I'm blanking on. Those are all publicly available. And then the second question raised was in regards to, so there's like training, and then it sounds like maybe there's some, updates and possibly needs for like ongoing training. Can you just speak to that a little bit? Like, do we just do like one and done training, or do we do annual? Just speak to that.
Sure.
process. Thank you.
So there's specific training to become certified in nonviolent crisis intervention. We also train our administrators and our special education staff, as well as crisis team members, on Act 118. What is required in Act 118? And when the year it was changed, and again, this year we reviewed some of those changes with our staff, with our administrators, going through what's different compared to past years, what's expected for staff to be compliant. So that is covered with our administrators, as well as with our special education staff, and then building crisis teams.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other board comment or question on this item? Thank you. Moving on to the buildings and grounds report. Capital improvement referendum update.
Thank you. Let's see. Yes. Yep.
Hello, Greg Chewinski here again, Buildings and Grounds Director. I have with me today Chad Bathke here to my right from VJS Construction. Also Nick Kent from Plunkett Race Associates, along with we do have Doug Kunde here and Chris Coggins, should there be any questions after our presentation. So what we wanted to do here, especially with me only being in this position, even though I was highly involved throughout the course of the years of the referendum projects and all of that, I wanted to give a kind of a high level overview of where we started, what we have all accomplished, where we are at, and where do we need to go next. So just I know that most of you were here throughout all of this process, but just to give a kind of a general overview of the construction timeline, especially as it pertains initially here to the new construction, we'll call that, of the 4 elementary schools. We obviously passed referendum in November of 2018. Starting almost immediately upon the referendum being voted yes by the community, design began and construction and stuff started in as early as spring of 2019 of both Lincoln and Underwood elementary schools. During the process of that, we get to somewhere in the spring of 2020, while we are still working on construction of Lincoln and Underwood, began the process of constructions of both McKinley and Wilson STEM. September of 2020, Lincoln Underwood complete. September of 2021, McKinley, Wilson STEM complete. Timeline going forward, spring of 2022, review remaining needs and continue implementation. So the page I just want to kind of share with you here and just kind of high level talks about the new construction projects being the new buildings, if you will. What you'll see in the top line is the initial budget amount that was when the referendum was approved. These were the initial referendum estimates, budget amounts for these buildings. Your next line there is that's the total estimates of construction costs only. So that's essentially the VJS agreements and contracts and all of that kind of stuff and all of their costs for constructing the building. The third line there is going to be additional construction site improvement, move-in readiness, all of that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of the furniture, fixtures, equipment, even some of the stuff like paying for architectural fees and civil engineering fees, as well as the abatement fell directly on the school district to pay for that directly. It wasn't included in the construction costs. And there were also costs associated with moving buildings out and all of that kind of stuff to get ready for construction or demolition or what have you. So it's important to note here on those, although Lincoln and Underwood are pretty much, we're reconciled with where we're at with costs, McKinley and Wilson, we're still working with VJS and PRA to reconcile all of our costs. So wanted to note here that some of these, especially towards the end, are still just projected things, but we're pretty close to where we are. So, and then it gives the kind of the final total there of what those projects cost, initial budget, obviously the construction costs, and then all the additional costs that the district paid for directly. And then you're going to see the differences on the bottom. And I'm going to let Chad or Nick, if they want to speak just a little bit, because it kind of shows you that we seem to be, a little bit higher than what we projected to be, or what we estimated to be in the original Lincoln, but lower at Underwood and McKinley, but higher on Wilson. With that, I'll kind of hand it over to Chad with some of the reasonings for that and the challenges and stuff that we dealt with on that.
Sure, thanks, Greg. Just as a follow-up point of clarification, the initial budget amount that's shown was a budget that was established pre-referendum. So in essence, there was concepts for the buildings put together, but the design and any finality to that design was not completed yet. One other point on Lincoln, the Lincoln numbers are all inclusive. So that number does include $700,000 of outdoor classroom donation money. That was never part of a budget. That came in after pre-referendum and after the initial budget was put together. So rather than the 1.5 million, that number is closer to 815,000 if you take out that $700,000 of outdoor classroom. But looking at Lincoln and Wilson and just the overall kind of the way that this happened, preliminary concepts were put together. We then went to referendum. Referendum was approved, and then really started this community engagement process on Mike, kind of what you were talking about with some other initiatives that are being talked about in the district. The community was engaged, and there were workshops that were held with the community, with administration on ultimately what's the right way to design these buildings, what makes the most sense on the sites, in the neighborhoods, and in the communities that these buildings are going to be built. And there were lots of changes and modifications that were made to the initial concepts because of those workshops. Really good input from the community on where will the buildings be located on the site? What are the sites going to look like? How many stories should the buildings be? And things like that, that really modified exactly how these were going to be built. Lincoln and Wilson did both end up being larger buildings. They had some more square footage. And that really was because of the efficiencies that PRA was able to design. They can design a brand new building a whole lot more efficient than they can when they're working with some pieces of an existing building. So Lincoln and Wilson really are a result of a little bit larger buildings, and then also modifications that were made in the initial designs. And then ultimately, what we had to deal with at Lincoln and Wilson as far as existing conditions. So existing structure, things were uncovered as we started building those buildings that weren't necessarily completely anticipated. We weren't able to take all the structure apart and find out exactly what was where. And we had contingencies to deal with those things. So we used much more of our contingencies at Lincoln and Wilson, thus showing the numbers that you see. And that at Underwood and McKinley, with those being brand new builds, we used very little project contingency. The district didn't change the scope of those buildings after the design. And there weren't many modifications or unknowns that we uncovered at those facilities. So that really just kind of paints a picture, hopefully, for you of how those numbers are to be. Nick, anything I missed?
No, I think it's an accurate representation of how this came about. And I think as we went through this process, we looked holistically at the mission in front of us in creating these 4 essentially new schools, whether they were completely new or reutilizing existing pieces. And all along, we were trying to incorporate those community concepts. We were trying to incorporate the standards that we'd established that we were trying to achieve in all 4 of these. And as Chad pointed out, in the case of our brand new buildings, they turned out to be very efficient. We were able to assemble this kit of parts in a very efficient manner that resulted in some savings. And working within the existing confines of Lincoln and Wilson, I think we created wonderful learning facilities. But with any renovation, there are always some challenges, and there's some inefficiencies. And those resulted, again, as Chad said, in generally a little bit bigger buildings to make them really reflect the same model school, if you remember that term, that we had developed earlier on. So the same kit of parts were in all 4 of these buildings.
And just to kind of make sure everybody understands, this was not a surprise to any of us. You know, we knew these numbers as we were going in after we bid the projects and the design was completed. So we managed the money and we managed the funds in essence accordingly.
Greg, do you want to speak to and just remind the board and the community of what we discussed regarding purchase orders and anything under $250,000 per the board were POs and purchases that were handled by the district. Anything above $250,000 was brought to the board. If you could just speak to that component of things, because as a governing board, they may have recalled approvals that they made that were above $250,000. But if you can just talk to the scope of how many other vendors came through under that threshold.
Sure. So under that additional construction site improvement and move-in preparedness costs, what we refer to them when we reconcile with BJS are those the owner costs. So and that could be, like I said, anything from architectural fees to what have you. And there's spreadsheets of piles of different vendors for furniture, fixtures, appliances, all of that kind of stuff, play structure purchases and all that kind of stuff. And it was my understanding when assuming this role that there was something along the way, I wasn't at the meeting or what have you, that did allow the, the purchase or the purchase of anything under $250,000 or less did not necessarily need to go to school board for approval. I would imagine I could understand the reasons why with the mass amount of purchases that we did, some of which being, between that $20,000 and $50,000 threshold, all that kind of stuff, or over 50 and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, it would have been a lot to bring to the board I'm guessing that that's why that decision was made, and I don't mean to make assumptions, but that was my understanding of it. So yeah, all of those costs associated would be in that third row, if you will. There. Does that explain kind of what we had discussed?
I just think in light of some of our other conversations around purchasing, that the board should just revisit that decision that was made at the beginning of the construction project. So thank you for bringing that up.
Just to clarify too, I know from just knowing what I know on how things went in this district, it wasn't just we don't have to approve this, so we don't need to go for proposals or what have you. There were certain things that were decided based on keeping consistency with the play structures and wanting the same type of structures and all of that. Those decisions were made based on that. But in other situations, like going out for furniture bids and all of that kind of stuff, or different things, that there were multiple quotes gotten for all of those. So just to clarify that. So then, along with the new construction, obviously we had a lot of capital improvement projects funded by referendum as well. So we wanted to just kind of throw these in here as well. So in spring of 2019 there, while we're building Lincoln and Underwood, we did some capital improvement projects as well with referendum dollars. West High School would have been, and I'll just give you high level view. There is a link here on this next page, which it gives you it's still high level, but a little bit more detail on all of the projects within this. But West High School, for instance, would have been, like the second phase of HVAC upgrades there, phase 2. A continued project from the previous year that was not referendum. So another one there would have been the renovation of the fab lab, the shop classes and all of that kind of stuff, and adding a brand new entrance there that could potentially be used for community use, had ADA accessibility into those areas. Along with that, on that year would have been Roosevelt, which, we call it the Roosevelt HVAC project, but I think it's important to note that it was so much more than that. It was not just Roosevelt HVAC, it was air conditioning, added all of that kind of stuff, but it was a renovation of a new office space, a new secure entryway, ADA accessibility components of there. It was also a renovation of a touch up, if you will, of classrooms with finishes like brand new flooring, new ceiling, new lighting, new paint. Also furniture, fixtures, and equipment purchased that. And that's kind of a theme throughout most of these schools as we go here. So, and then in spring and summer of 2020, with essentially we're 4 buildings, new construction buildings at the time. And then we're also doing those same upgrades that I talked to you at Roosevelt, HVAC, furniture, finishes, all of that kind of stuff at Madison, Jefferson, Washington, and Whitman schools. So all of those receiving kind of those same components of renovations and purchases and all of that. East High School on that one was the tech ed renovation at East High School, as well as the new art space that was created at Wauwatosa East High School as well. With some things, there was some additional adding of ramps within the schools in places that did not actually have ADA accessibility at East High School. So it was construction of ramps and stuff to be able to provide that. So, and then we get to summer of 2021, which is, well, we're finishing, or we're just about finished. So we obviously have the Roosevelt site improvement projects, which, as the board approved a while back, know that this one is not all referendum dollars, but there is some Fund 41 dollars are funded through the district money with this as well. And that's the improvement of the site. It's the new fields, it's the new asphalt, it's the new park-like feel, it's the ADA accessibility site-wide, and soon to be new play structure as well. And then Eisenhower and Longfellow very much along the lines of Madison and Jefferson, and Roosevelt was major HVAC upgrades. I also do want to point out that with most of these schools, we got updated electrical services necessary to be able to have the capacity to be able to run chiller systems, which are air conditioning, which these schools never had before. Eisenhower was one that actually we were able to put in a new emergency generator as well, an emergency generator that if we did lose power for an extended period of time, especially in like the winter months, we'd at least have a boiler running. We would have things running, to the degree that we'd be able to protect the school. Montessori school here did get a minor HVAC upgrade because we had 6 classrooms down in Montessori that even though the rest of the classrooms and spaces had AC, they did not. So it was addition of cooling coils and condensing units that would allow air conditioning in those spaces. So they at least have that. Madison Elementary School, that gets into like the parking lot, for instance. We completely did a reconstruct, and this was not a VJS project per se. This was more one that I managed and we went out to bid for. We redid the parking lot there, as well as actually the Montessori Fisher parking lot here was also redone. And East High School, to wrap that one up on that one, was what did we do at East High School this year? Oh, we're still working on, the generator project. So we move on to the next part of it because, in 2024, the referendum projects must be complete. It's my understanding it has to be done within a certain time frame. So what's next? So that's the link for you. If you'd like to click on that at any point in time, and the public can certainly click on it and take a look at those that I kind of outlined a little bit more than I thought. But so financial status of referendum funding, let's go there. So right now, even though we have to reconcile yet with where we're at, it is looking pretty healthy. Contingencies left in McKinley and Wilson Elementary School projects. We are right now looking at a projected somewhere to the tune of $3 million remaining of funds for additional potential referendum projects. And I did want to add in here, and I wanted to kind of give an overview because not only were we doing the referendum funded projects, new construction, but we were also doing additional capital improvement projects over the last couple of years as well. It's my understanding, and I know in the last couple of years that this number, as far as what we spend towards capital improvement projects every year, was not consistent with this. But historically, was my understanding that we're roughly about $2 million per year spent on capital improvement projects. Projects for these last couple of years were selected based on that assessment that was done prior to referendum, that was studied by the Facilities Advisory Committee, and that was who made the recommendation to the school board. So a lot of these capital improvement projects were based on that as well, just as the referendum was. There are times throughout the years, and there will be times going forward, that Buildings and Grounds has to, do things at their discretion based on emerging needs of wear and tear, and not just, they may not be on the facilities assessment, but things that came up, things that were new or what have you, that would need to be addressed.
So Greg, if I may, just for a minute, just to kind of summarize a few things. I was thinking as we were putting this all together of a board meeting that I probably will never forget. And we were putting all of these projects together. And I remember the board challenged our team and they said, how can you pull all of this together? What's the time frame and how quickly can you do these projects? There was a concern from the board of construction fatigue in the community, and you didn't want to see necessarily this drag out for a long period of time. So, at that meeting, we, in essence, took about a year off of the schedule that we had been projecting and said, we'll find ways to make that happen. So in summary, everything that we kind of just went through, that was $124.9 million of work, and it was all done in less than 3 years. That totaled the 4 new builds, new and renovated projects, and then about 30 or so itemized capital improvement projects.
And Chad, that's in addition to Fund 41 projects. And that's in addition to the annual $2 million capital improvement work that comes out of Fund 10. So those are 3 different funding sources for multiple projects. Is that an accurate statement?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Yes.
Donation.
Yes.
And the donation.
And the donation, yeah.
Yes.
And just again, as a reminder, the FAC at the time that we went through the study and we went through all of the work sessions, the FAC identified about $350 million of long-range needs in the district. And this was really identified as a phase 1 for all of those projects. So all of those needs, they're still out there, they're identified. And again, where that all goes and what next steps are, I think is what part of this conversation is.
Yeah, and again, and this would be a more, this link here would go to the capital improvement projects that would have been funded by Fund 41 or Fund 10 or what have you throughout the years, along with the referendum projects as well. And I won't go over all of those here, but they, for instance, this last summer, the roofing projects that were approved to do for this summer was not a referendum project. So the Longfellow's roof A and C, and we've done some monument sides, the signs, the exterior signs at some of the schools over the years, access control, some HVAC stuff as well. I mean, there's a pile of things. So, and I won't go through all of those, but just to kind of outline, you know, that we tried to stay on, as Chad was indicating as well, you know, the needs that were outlined by the assessment, by the FAC, so that anything that we did with non-referendum money, we would be in line with what was determined needed to be done out of that $350 million of outlined needs. So what is next? So in conversations that I've had in the last couple of weeks here in the district and stuff, the last facilities plan, as you know, that we've just discussed, or the last assessment was done in 2017. We're pushing 5 years now. We have done a pile of work. We absolutely have in this district, but there could be things, you know, along the way here that are new and all of that kind of stuff that might have needs as well, along with those additional needs outlined in that assessment back in 2017 and 18. And I think we need to update it essentially. I think we need to, with the help of industry experts and all of that kind of stuff, bring them back in, take a look at what we've done to this point, get a full assessment redone on where we are now at currently after spending the money that we did and made the improvements that we did on things. And I think we need to take a look at re-outlining what our long-range plan is here in the district. And I think that's something that obviously, you know, I would be absolutely looking to work with the district on that, and then be bringing to all of you for, you know, figuring out where we need to go forward. It's a big decision to make, and certainly like indicated here, that there could still be some referendum funds left. Where do we put that? What didn't we get to that was potentially initially part of the referendum, and how do we start looking at doing the rest of that monster list of needs? So that's certainly next steps in my book. I would be looking at doing a facility study here starting in sometime October, November, which would take the course of a couple of months to get architects and engineers in here to go through the plans of all the stuff that we did, and then go through the buildings and do a reassessment of where we are at. So looking in probably the springtime of 2022 to have that assessment and start looking at building that long range plan now that we have completed this referendum essentially. Not quite, but now that we're nearing the end. And then for me to myself to, with the help of the district and the board, to determine the time frame of those remaining capital improvement referendum projects. Do you guys have anything else to add, or?
No, that's
okay. Are there
a summary of 5 years?
Yeah.
The only other thing I would add, thank you, Chad, Craig, and Nick. Board members, I would just ask you to also consider long-term the creation of a Fund 46 account. Fund 41 is a short-term account that you can create within our funding formula within the state of Wisconsin for capital improvement projects. But Fund 46 is more of a long-term account that allows you to invest money over 10 years or more. So Fund 41 is more of a short-term. Fund 46 is more long-term. As we continue to see a healthy fund balance, which is good, we can then distribute those funds into specific areas such as Fund 41 or 46. So from a financial standpoint, that may be another consideration just to show our due diligence and our willingness to not defer maintenance, to have those two funds. I think typically in a community, when they support the school system the way that ours have, they like to see both funds created. So that's down the road as well, another conversation we would want to engage you in. But I think Greg accurately pointed out that the next major task for us is to renew that long-range facilities plan. The last thing I would say before you have questions for this panel is during my listening sessions that I've been doing for the last month or so, one of the major topics that have continued to come up is what about our school? So there are members of our school community, be it staff members, parents, community members who are saying, we're really happy for the schools that had the major construction. We're even happy for some of the schools. If you go to Greg's slide that shows they were touched multiple years for referendum capital improvement projects, and you will see Roosevelt's a great example. Tulsa East is another example. There are other schools within the district who are saying, when's our turn? And so having a vision that's associated with that long-range facilities plan would go a long way.
Any board questions or comments? Mr. Meyer.
So, Dr. Means, thank you. I very much appreciate the statement about a vision that will cover the rest, so to speak, that be a front burner activity. I have a couple points here, but one is a follow-up question on the music room input we had about McKinley. Was any resolution found for that?
So I can tell you, I was just asked at least to get a rough order of magnitude for what it would cost. You're referring to the music rooms being on the second floor at McKinley, is that correct?
Yes.
Rough order of magnitude of doing that would go to the tune of somewhere about $500,000 to make that change.
You in public service on the board, there's some things that will haunt me forever as mistakes. And that is one of them. That and it speaks to the need for user verification. Like you gentlemen were here for the van conversation. We need to always be verifying with our user community that a decision is a good idea for them as well. For context, so the community knows, the music rooms were moved from the first floor to the second floor at McKinley based on a need to reduce the size of the footprint of the building to accommodate neighborhood setback requests. Well, I'm not sure that was the right decision. And I don't want to revisit the whole thing for tonight, but the teachers weren't consulted, to my understanding, and that will be forever a miss in my conscience that we didn't do that the way I think we should have done it. Highlighted by our van discussion here, we should need to always be consulting with the users on change requests or final decisions. So that said, I'm like 99% pleased for what it's worth. And that one, like I said, will haunt me. I was there, I voted that night, and I'm not happy with myself. So going forward, as we look at our planning, Dr. Means, and more just my opinion, the original facilities committee, I was on the committee and it had diversity representation, but not enough. And I wonder if with more diverse representation on a facilities committee, if there are some cultural or interest group specific biases that maybe we had about how to do things. I don't know. But if people aren't in the room enough, in enough numbers, then the people who are there, it's harder to be heard, really. So I think of our various cultural diversity needs about populations of color. I think about our students and citizens with disabilities. I think about our seniors. There's certain things that we could do for restroom facilities, for outdoor recreational facilities that would help them, that would help everybody. Even the idea, for example, the Longfellow pool is at a warmer temperature than the East pool to accommodate small children and the elderly. So that whole idea of bringing in more diverse representation and feedback in our next round of doing this, to be sure we haven't inadvertently culturally forgotten some things or not understood some things, I think would be really important. So thank you.
Any other board comments or questions? Mr. Rollins?
Thank you. And thank you for all the work that went into the referendum. I mean, it was a ton of work, so it's great to see all the buildings up. It's awesome. The question I've got in regards, well, I've got several questions. The long range facilities plan, can you speak to like what would be included in that and what would not be included in that we perhaps did as part of the referendum? Like, would we be doing community surveys and other kinds of steps, or would we just be looking at what, seems to be aging or broken that needs to be fixed?
I think just the initial piece of it that I think we need to do first is just get the assessment piece of it updated initially. And then where we go from there about developing the plan would be conversations that we likely have with this board on how we do proceed forward. And if it is bringing up a new facilities advisory community together so we can get that engagement, we can get that feedback. My initial goal for this year would be to get that assessment piece done. And then we start to take a look at that piece as well as the long range plan that was created prior to this referendum or have you, and look at how we, if we get a group like that together again, to look at now how do we piece this together. But the initial thing, my goal for this year would definitely be the assessment piece and get started on how do we go forward with this long range facilities plan and what that would include.
And is there ballpark cost associated with something like that, or is that just our own? I imagine it's not our own analysis.
Sure, for an assessment, I mean, if we were to, engage, obviously we're going to want to engage an architectural firm. We're going to want to engage engineers. We're going to want to engage roofing consultants. We're going to want to engage a construction management company that would be able to put budgets to things and costs and stuff like that as well. We would be looking something to the tune with all of those different studies, maybe around $40,000 to $45,000 roughly. Okay. So, and that's based on actually me reaching out to several companies already and getting proposals in line for that, which we have not made any decision on as of yet whatsoever.
Okay. And as part of the presentation, one of the things was that we had to spend the referendum dollars down by 2024. So I guess one of the questions I've got is there any reason that we couldn't just use the referendum dollars to just pay for the things that need to be fixed that are, facilities related now, right? Because those dollars are fixed and less flexible, and then use some other dollars that have some more flexibility for future years. Does that make sense?
It does.
Is that an option that we have?
It is.
Okay.
It is. I think that goes along with also the timelines were really important because it shows the stress that we placed on our buildings and grounds team in a short period of time. So providing some type of bandwidth regeneration for that team would be important as well. So I think getting a revised long-range facility plan along with finding the low-hanging fruit, if you will, on that plan to work on those things without stressing that team more than we've already stressed them will be obviously part of our goals.
To tag on to that, is the interest earned part of that same end date?
Yes, it is. Okay. Traditionally, once a referendum is passed,
yes,
you have 5 years to utilize the funds.
But I know there were funds that came from the tax, and then there was interest earned on our monies. That I just wonder if that's the same.
I think
you know what I
mean.
Okay.
I do. Let me double check on that, but I believe
it may provide some flexibility. Okay.
I believe there's a 5-year frame, but I'll double check.
Okay.
Any other board questions or comments?
No, I distinctly remember the meeting, and I think it was me who said, can we do this a year faster? And what I didn't equate into the question was we would have a pandemic in the midst of it. So thank you for the work. Sean covered a lot of the questions I had. I think I'm very interested and curious of what are some of the key big ticket items that we can knock off this list. 3 years ago, we would have been talking about the East Boiler. I don't know if that's the thing, but I'm interested to kind of hear where are we at? What's our assessments? What are the key things that we want to invest in now? Or what key maintenance issues do we need to tackle to make sure schools are in great shape for kids to be in? So thank you all very much for you and your teams on all the work done. I still have not gotten into all these schools. So I need to figure out a way to make sure I get in there when the kids aren't there.
Our communications director, sir, is planning something for the board and community in the month of October to officially have a welcome to these 4 schools. I think with the pandemic, we were unable to truly celebrate the opening of Underwood and Lincoln. And so we're looking to the month of October to officially celebrate as a community.
Outstanding. Thank you for that.
If I can just add to that, we had a very robust team, behind VJS to accomplish what was accomplished. But overall, team-wise, it took the district, it took the community, it took a partnership with the architect, with the construction manager, with the city. In order to accomplish what was accomplished, it took everybody. And kudos to the community, to the city, to the district, to the construction and architect teams. And I just have to say that from our standpoint, Chris Coggins, who's sitting in the back here, he was the guy for us that held it all together. So I want to thank Chris for all of his hard work and our team's hard work to pull this together.
Thank you and kudos.
Thank you. The only comment I have is as we think about how we're going to spend those remaining dollars to really look at things that are going to have kind of a longer term impact. Is it boiler at East? What's kind of our ROI on those things? How do we spend some money now to save some money down the road if possible? What are those maintenance things that we can put our district in a good place 10 years from now as well? So I appreciate that. Look forward to the study and what we're going to do. We will move on to community comment on this item. Anyone in the room that would like to make a comment? Please come forward, state your name and address, and you have 3 minutes.
Hi, Deb Falk-Palek, 7435 West Wells Street. We have an incredible group of gentlemen who came tonight with expertise in the area, and I'd really like to commend you all for what you've done. And I too look forward to being able to see what you've built for our community. So thank you very much. My first research project that I published is entitled Return to School After Spinal Cord Injury. And it was published in a medical journal, not in a architectural or construction journal. And I have an idea on how you could spend a little bit of this money here. And it's probably like 12 inches long. I was on the playground at Wilson and really just enjoying watching the children playing on the playground. And I noticed the ramping there's a smaller, if you're facing north, the smaller playground on the left, the ramping came right to the sidewalk. But the larger structure with the ramping, it was concrete with some of the, for lack of a better term, AstroTurf, and then the ramp. So I'm wondering if that gap could be closed so that it doesn't pose problems with any mobility devices going from concrete to AstroTurf to the ramp. So if you can visualize what I may be talking about, or if somebody could take a peek at that could really make a very big difference for individuals who use mobility devices to have that seamless transfer going across surfaces, and particularly in the winter when snow or ice or what have you may gather in there. So again, thank you to all of you who your expertise has really created some beautiful buildings in our district. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment from in the room? Jamie, is anyone online?
There's no hands raised.
All right. Thank you all very much for being here tonight. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you all very much.
We will move on to final public comment on non-agenda items. Anyone in the room that would like to speak to anything that was not on the agenda this evening? Please come forward, state your name and address, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is Aaron Bridges. I live at 3226 North Mayfield Road. You can probably take a guess why I'm here. I didn't get a chance to make it to the meeting in August when you guys were deciding this COVID reentry plan, but I have 3 daughters, one at Eisenhower, one at Whitman, and one at Wauwatosa West High School. And they come home, each of them every day. You know, they have different, kind of different every day, but my little one especially, with how much trouble she's having keeping this mask on and trying to breathe through it. And, you know, last year, I can say we didn't really know what was going on. And we were trying to just kind of reach for solutions, and the mask thing seemed like an obvious one. But I can say that this whole last year, I'm pretty well read on the inefficiency of these masks, especially these cloth ones that I see most of the people in the room wearing here. The only one that even has a chance of stopping these viral particles are these N95 masks. Yeah, the one that I saw you take off a couple times and kind of reach in and touch that, I mean, totally, it's not effective if you're doing that. So, I mean, all I would really ask is I would echo what I saw in this meeting in August from all the parents, which is not a mandate, but I mean, if you'd like to wear a mask, then by all means, you know, if it makes you feel safe, then go for it. But making these kids wear this mask, I feel like you guys just don't really think at all about, you know, what's going to come of making these kids wear masks and not seeing their teachers' faces. And I could barely even tell who was speaking in the room here most of the time when you guys are talking. I mean, this is definitely going to have some effects on these kids. And also, I mean, this virus, just like any other respiratory virus, it's not going anywhere. There's no way that we're going to eradicate it, whether we get a vaccine or not. So, I mean, this just doesn't seem like a viable solution to me. What's the end game here with making people wear masks? And I mean, you can go anywhere else in this city, including in this room right now, me not wearing a mask, without a mask. Is it really the 25-year-olds in my daughter's class that are going to have an effect on this? I mean, I know these are all kind of rhetorical questions, but I would say no, they're not. You know, you can go on the NIH's website right now and find no less than 3 studies funded by the NIH that show that these particles, like I said, are so much smaller than the pores in the masks that you're all wearing that it's akin to taking a handful of sand and maybe some bigger rocks and throwing it at a chain link fence. For sure, some of it's going to get caught in the fence, but I think you get my point. And once again, you know, I don't have a problem if people want to wear a mask. That's totally fine, but it shouldn't be mandated. And again, I ask you, well, what's the end game? Are we going to be standing here? Am I going to be standing here next year asking the same questions, or the year after that? Because like I said, these respiratory viruses are not going anywhere. And you know, I'm pretty sure that the next thing coming up is going to be mandating these shots. And
so you're well over the 3 minutes. If you could wrap up, appreciate it.
Sure, I can wrap up. Yeah, I guess that's it. I mean, just consider that. What is the end game here? Are we going to be standing here for years and years wearing masks, taking them off to take a sip of water and putting them back on? Thanks for the time.
Any other public comment on non-agenda items? Please come forward, state your name and address. You have 3 minutes.
Joe Mafluth again from 772 North 116th Street. Just like to possibly get an update as to where things stand with the busing situation and our athletic teams. I'm still hearing reports that unfortunately our student athletes are having to cancel events or not go to events because they're not able to get transportation to those events. Solution seems quite straightforward. We need to allow the students themselves to drive themselves or parents to do it. There are waiver releases that can be easily had. If your legal team can't do it, I suggest you look for a different legal team. We feel very free to encourage our students to attend away games for things like football, where they're going to be driving themselves or going to be driven by family members. But when it comes to participating in events for themselves, they're not able to do it. We need to solve this problem. We can't wait any longer. Our seasons are going away. We need a resolution now. Please find a way before the next meeting to solve this problem and get our student athletes where they belong to their events. Thank you.
Any other public comment from in the room on non-agenda items? Go ahead.
Two quick comments. Basically, first off, I'm wondering about the status of the ESSER refunds, and how much they are, and when we'll get a report on that. Second comment is, I know that we have a new apartment for students with disabilities, and I'm wondering if anybody in a wheelchair has run over there and to look at accessibility issues, just to make sure that apartment does meet the needs of all the students with disabilities that might be using it. Thank you.
Any other public comment from inside the room? Jamie, anyone online?
Yeah, one person with their hand raised. Sky, you have the microphone. Please state your name and address.
My name is Raymond Kronik. I was wondering, this is for Dr. Means, about the Madison Elementary entry sidewalk that's not in ADA compliance. Where's this, the status on that? I haven't heard anything about it, but it's no cones have been put out, no sign, nothing. I was just wondering, is it ever going to be fixed, since we're talking about ADA compliance today? Thank you.
Thank you. Jamie, anyone else online?
There are no hands raised.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for your comments this evening. We will then move into take a vote on adjourning into executive closed session. I have a motion for that. Sorry, I should say per session per Wisconsin statute 19.85 1C and G to discuss personnel matters with legal counsel.
So moved. I think Sean moved and I'll second.
Thank you. Ms. Newman, please call the roll.
Dr. Jessup Banger,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Ms. Muehlfeld,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Dillman.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. We are in closed session. Let's reconvene at 9:05. Let's take a little break.